Here.
Councilman Talamini,
Here.
Councilman Van Ack.
All right, it's a budget meeting, moment of silence.
Here.
Councilman Talamini,
Here.
Councilman Van Ack.
My apologies. Actually, it doesn't look like Grant's here yet.
Rand?
He's going to be joining us.
Okay.
All right, we're in the middle of moment of silence. Okay, this meeting is being held in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Law, duly announced, submitted to the newspaper, and advertised more than 48 hours in advance of the meeting, and notice posted in the municipal building and on the borough website. And this is for general budget discussion.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Maybe I'll start. So we are poised to introduce the budget at Wednesday night's council meeting. The purpose of the meeting this morning is to give David and I final direction on how you want to see the budget introduced so we can prepare the state budget document accordingly, since that's what you're actually acting upon on Wednesday. So as a follow-up to the last budget meeting, we took a look at the various suggestions that were made for ways to reduce the tax levy increase down to 2%. Those included looking at the effect of reducing the reserve for fire apparatus, for delaying the replacement of the chief's vehicle, utilizing additional surplus, looking at reducing the reserve for uncollected taxes, and if it was feasible or not to perhaps remove the police body cameras from the capital program, because we expect to get some level of state funding for that. So we put together an analysis for you that kind of looked at the longer term impacts of those decisions. That was provided to you last week. And I think I'm just going to turn it over to David, and he can kind of walk through some of that in a little bit more detail. David?
I thought it was passed in the state that we had to get the body cams.
We will have to get the body cams, just the level of state funding is unknown at this point.
But we will have to, at some point, we have to buy it. I don't know how much time they gave us.
June.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That answers that question.
Thank you, Rich. You've covered the items that we're going to review real quick. Just to kind of give you the quick overview, this is where the $240,000 target comes from. It's looking to get that impact to the municipal tax levy down to 2%. It saves the average assessed homeowner $45.75 for the year, 88 cents savings per week. So that's the target. That's the goal you put before us. And this is the impact of some of those items. Any questions before I move on?
No.
Well, Dave, what was the savings again per household?
If we get it down to 2%, it's $45.75 per household.
And what is the household based on?
414,000 and change.
That's unreal. Okay. Right now.
So the first thing that I want to just quickly go through is the RUT. There's a lot of information on here, but it just kind of shows the different options and the different things that we looked at when we looked at the RUT. Reducing the RUT by 35 to 45K has manageable risk. So if we do that, we could take $40,000 here out of the levy. We think it's likely, if not next year, the following year, that we'll have to push that back up based upon what the average collection rate has been for the past 5 years. It was a little bit better last year than it had been. Who knows what the impact of COVID and people's ability to pay taxes will continue to be this year. So it is manageable this year. Again, the impact long-term is it will have to go back up, so that $40,000 that you take out now, is eventually over the next couple of years, you're going to have to put it back in. Any questions on the RUT?
How did you come up with 40,000?
We kind of put that in between where we are, where the max we could take out would be, and what the average has been the last couple of years, and what would happen if we had to go back to the average.
So what are tax collections looking at right now, David? Are we running a deficit, or, I mean, are they coming in are we having issues?
No, it's slightly below last year, and our tax rate tends to be fairly stable throughout. We actually went into the tax sale this past December, actually slightly better than we had the rest of the year, which was good. We had fewer people in the tax sale, but you know, during the year does not give us an indicator of the tax sale, because right now our tax collection rate's in the mid-90s. By the time we get to the tax sale, we're at 99%. So we're okay. No issues in terms of cash flow.
So it looks pretty good, except that 2 years down the road, we're probably going to have to make it up a bit.
Yeah, at some point it's going to go back up just based upon the law of averages.
Okay, very good. So that looks like a positive area to save for this year.
It's a possibility, yep. And it's manageable. Item number 3 is increasing our surplus utilization. We can do it. We do have surplus available. We do have our surplus policy in place. We had a pretty good year last year in terms of replenishment. The challenge here is if we increase utilization of surplus, we'll dig into our balance. So at some point, probably 3 or 4 years down the road, we won't be able to use that much surplus anymore because we're not replenishing it. Couple of things that are going into that. The RUT, if we do take that $40,000 down, that's surplus that's not going to regenerate next year. So we're taking an extra $40,000 out of next year's surplus because we're not replenishing. If we take $50,000 out this year and use it for the budget, you know, that eventually is going to decrease our bank to the point where we've got to say, okay, where's the offset? So taking a rough estimate based upon average replenishment rates, we think in 2024, we won't be able to utilize that $160,000 extra in surplus that will be in this year's budget, and that would have to move over to a tax point. So again, it is manageable. It is doable this year to take $50,000.
So that's on top of the 45,000 or so for the uncollected taxes, right?
Correct.
But
So it is possible.
we're kicking the can down the road, right?
That is correct. All of the actions that we're proposing today, for the most part, in that list are moving the increase down the road, because none of them are a reducing of a net cost or an increasing of a new revenue. So you're just moving that expense at some point.
Okay, for my part, I really don't want to see us increasing the surplus utilization on the on our surplus, except for the RUT.
I agree. And actually, Rich and I talked about some stuff that came up late on Friday and over the weekend into this morning. We may have an alternative option to present to you as well, which also gets us down to the 2%.
Okay.
I agree with John. I don't think we should be playing games with the surplus to that point.
We did that a couple of years ago in Apparatus.
Right.
Yep. Items 4 and 5 are related to each other. This is the chief vehicle replacement and the fire apparatus reserve reduction. We can certainly take those out. And what you net gain is a 1.1% decrease in the impact of the levy. Obviously, at some point, we're going to have to put that funding back in, because we do need, you know, to some point replace those things and maintain our capital outlay. So again, what we take out now, because we're not net eliminating those costs, we're moving them, creates an increase down the road.
Right, and
So
something
again,
to keep
taking
in
those
mind,
out,
sorry, David, something to keep in mind with the capital improvement fund, the overall amount of funding for that is this year's capital requests are actually on the low side compared to, let's say the last 7 or 8 years. This is probably the smallest capital program that we're presenting. And partly that's because a lot of the big ticket items, the DPW, the Patriots Way Bridge, the library, that's all been addressed. But I wouldn't expect to, I would expect to see larger capital programs coming forward for certain things. So, one of our goals in our discussions is, all right, what's the, relative merit of trying to keep that capital improvement fund number kind of where it is, to give more flexibility in avoiding debt going forward.
Okay.
Right.
And to get us down to where Dave just talked about the 2%, is this plan reducing the fire apparatus money that we put away down 100,000 or down the whole 200,000?
So there's actually a couple other items that go into this. So what it would be between all of the capital items, because we actually got some feedback and some better numbers on the spillway, and we've got some thoughts on the bulletproof, the body cams. So we think what the current proposal would be based upon what we talked about at the last meeting, we would get down to the 2%. We'd be taking $170,000 out of the net capital here. So between the apparatus, the spillway, the chief, there's a couple of things that float into that. We'll go over them in a second when we get to the final proposal. Good here?
Okay.
The body cams, we're not going to know until later. We think we're pretty sure we're going to get some funding. We think it would be an acceptable risk to take our 40,000 and reduce it in half and assume 20,000 for funding and 20,000 out of pocket. Even if we missed on that by a couple of $1,000s, we've got the funds in surplus to be able to cover it. So we think that's a good way to be safe about getting $20,000 out of outlay, but still make sure we can have the money to have the body cams.
So we're reducing it from 40 to 20?
Yes, sir.
I agree with that.
So that's projected on approximately 20,000 of money coming from the state then, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So if we did this, you can see what the impact of the changes are going to be. We get this year to 2%, but we see slight increases between 2.4 and 2.9% over the next 3 years because those cuts come back into the budget. The other thing that I attached just real quick was a very high-level, quick, down and dirty review of the apparatus replacement schedule. And the thought that Rich and I talked about was if we keep the funding at $200,000 and move the chief vehicle into that funding pool, the $70,000 would then obviously come off of this year's budget because the $70,000 for the potential future chief vehicle would just come out of the fire apparatus vehicle replacement fund. And the dollars look good. At that, spending that $200,000 over the next, 20 years, it would push some of the replacement schedules for a couple of the items maybe to 22, 24 years, but it still keeps us fairly close to that 20 and gives us the opportunity to do a proactive analysis of, okay, where are the vehicles? When should they be replaced? What's the process for determining whether it's 18, 20, 25, based upon the current status of each vehicle, not a rough guess.
Richard, I have a question. How much How much does a police vehicle cost us?
That depends on make, model. You're talking fully outfitted. It can be over $60,000, 65,000,
Oh, it is that much. Okay.
something in that neighborhood.
It just sounded like the fire chief vehicle was more expensive than the police vehicles. And I was wondering why.
Well, with the fire chief's vehicle, there's a lot of customization that goes into that. The entire back of the vehicle has to be, it's kind of taken up with radios, and that's all fabricated separately and installed. So it's not just buying the vehicle. There's a lot of, work to be done once you get it in hand to outfit it.
Okay, thank you.
So that raises an interesting question. If we were to come up with standardize our vehicle fleet at this point, would that make sense, so that now we can just simply change out the equipment instead of having to refabricate every single time, and also have consistency across the board from the police department and the fire department?
I don't know that there's much crossover there between the police and fire in terms of the outfitting, due to the nature of what they're used for. Standardization, it certainly has its merits. But in this case, let's say we're going to be replacing a vehicle that's 8 or 9 years old. Typically models change in that period of time. They come out with a new design. You probably, there are times when we can reuse equipment from one police vehicle to the next because we're turning those over a bit quicker. With the fire chief's vehicle, my guess is it's probably just too long a period of time to be able to just swap equipment from one vehicle to the next.
Because Richard, I thought the police vehicles were like $35,000.
I'd have to go back and look at see what the last ones were that we paid for. Well, that are actually still on order. They were kind of caught up with that chip shortage situation that's going on.
Because if they were $35,000, it seems like a lot of money, $25,000 to retrofit it.
There's quite a bit of work once we get them in hand to install the radios and everything else, that the cages and everything else that goes with it.
Okay.
Rich, I thought in capital it was $150,000 that you put in this year for the two vehicles.
Second.
130.
130. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So like 65 each.
So certainly based upon all of the things that, we've talked about and some of the ideas that you had us look at there, it does seem very doable. Again, there's a downstream effect of many of these decisions. So just to kind of give you more to chew on, we have an alternate proposal, which would include taking the 5-year assessment and deferring it over the next 5 years, the special assessment for the revaluation. We can take that $200,000 and not incur the cost this year and incur $40,000 a year for the next 5. We could then take that $200,000 along with $40,000 from the RUT and get us down to our 2% increase. Then on the capital side, we could still take out the chief's vehicle, reduce the spillway by $80,000, reduce the grant for the body-worn cameras by 20, and take the $171,000 from the storm sewer and move that to fully funded, reducing our future debt. And what that does, that saves $20,000 in the next 10 budgets for the debt off of that storm sewer. Long term, our best case scenario that would really get Rich and I relatively excited would be if the ART money that came in could then offset the debt authorized on the road program for next year. That would take $165,000 out of next year's budget, which would then take us to, a really good place of the next 4 years being at 2%. If the ARP doesn't happen for roads, we would still be at the same place we were with the changes that we had talked about otherwise, but we would have slightly less future debt.
What's the ARC money?
ARP
That
is the
is-
American Recovery Plan. That's potentially targeted 1.2 million for infrastructure that they're going to give the borough for the next 2 years. So if that is usable for roads, we can easily see a 2% flat increase for the next 4 years.
That would be great.
So right now, I think, even aside from that, I think Rich and my recommendation would be to get to the 2% by reducing the ruts, moving some capital items around, and using the special 5-year reassessment to get us to that 240,000 savings.
That seems to
Correct.
make sense to me. Make the most sense to me.
See, that's all we need. We need some exclusive outside the box thinking to put this in a relatively safe place for us moving forward. And I think what you guys just detailed to us, what Dave just detailed to us, does that without doing those cuts that we spoke about in the first part of this presentation. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Dave, did you say you had another plan also? Was this the alternative
No,
plan
no,
that you were just?
This is it.
This is it. Okay.
This is the alternative. It's basically what it's doing is it's saying, let's take advantage of the 5-year special emergency for a reassessment. You push that 40,000 for the next 5 years instead of 200 this year. It allows us to move some of those capital items around that we talked about, reduce our debt, and if we're lucky, not have any debt incurred this year if we can use the ARP money for roads, which would take $165,000 out of next year's budget. That would be huge for us.
Okay. Thank you.
We won't know that right
what if-
now.
And what
right?
is this going to cause for the following year? Your best guess.
Our best means we're at 2% for the next 4 years. If we
That's
can use
Wow.
the ARP money,
that's assuming use of the ARP money.
yeah.
And when will we
If
know
not,
that
then
was
it's
true?
roughly the same. 30, 60 days.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing. Probably a couple of months till we have some firm details on that.
So, and if we don't get the ARC money, where does that put us?
We're roughly the same as where we are with the other proposal, which is we'll be slightly higher over the next couple of years because we will be picking up that debt service on the roads. It won't be as much.
So there's no problem right now, Dave, anticipating the ARC program will give us the funding source we need for the roads?
We're not
we-
quite sure. There's relatively broad discretion from what we can see right now, in terms of using it for revenue replacement funding, and some other things. The issue that is kind of unclear is the legislation itself talked about using the funds for water, sewer, and broadband. We're hearing that other capital is likely to be approved, but nobody can tell us with any certainty about that yet.
Right, and it's not supposed to be used for reduce the budget of the taxes,
You cannot
It's not
use
supposed
it
to be used
for a tax.
right? That's what they
You can't use
said.
it for a tax decrease.
But using it for capital is not using it for a tax decrease.
Correct.
Correct.
So what is the amount for the roads or the ARC funding? Was it 1.3 million?
We're getting about 1.2, 1.25 each year for 2 years. So between 2.4 and 2.5 million overall. And then there is a separate $10 billion capital fund that was part of the ARP, that will be a grant-based program. We're supposed to have guidance on that within the next 60 days as well. And then, David and I have been talking about some potential ideas for what we could apply for with that. Again, depending on what the eligibility criteria are.
Sounds good to me.
So
You
Dave,
guys did a great job coming up with this plan.
Oh,
And
is that
to echo
Grant?
Councilman, yes, I've been here. Sorry I was late. Typical. I've like no internet all the time.
Oh, I thought it was the baby.
No, I'm constantly struggling with losing internet and having to reset everything and trying to get back up and
Sorry.
paying data overcharges because on my cell phone plan because we
Crazy.
like never have good internet at this house.
just get FiOS.
Time to move.
So
Into the house in Oakland.
David, quick question. So this still keeps us on the plan for pay as you go, correct? If we continue with
It actually goes closer to pay as you go. If the funding from ARP is able to be used for roads this year and next year, that would be 2 years where we wouldn't be adding any debt for roads to our total debt service. We in 2028 is our last payment of the 2015 debt, which is going to be about $1.1 million a year for the next 6 years. So now that bridge closes our gap between when that falls off and our current location by 2 years. That gives us down to 4 or 5 years where we have to potentially increase debt to cover the bridge before we can start paying for roads out of the money that we had been dedicating to the previous bond. So this is a huge move towards getting to pay as you go.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a little bit of a multiplier effect here by doing this, simply because we'd be saving on the debt service for the storm sewers, right? So there's a little bit of a multiplier effect there compared to the other options we were talking about. Sorry,
Yep.
Russell.
No, that's fine. So I was just going to say thank you to you guys for all your hard work. But so we think this is what we're going to be going? Do we have to take a vote on it? Do we have to, is this the plan? Just everyone's consensus. That's all.
I'd be very comfortable if this is what was presented.
Yes.
I want to thank Dave for listening to us and implementing and bringing us to a position where we're going to be moving from 3.77 down to 2, and it's going to be a great savings for the residents this year.
Well, we also really lucked out with
Especially
this
going
ARC
through
money.
COVID.
The ARC money is really saving us a lot.
That could be huge down the road. Yeah.
What do the words ARC money mean?
ARP is the American Rescue Plan.
All right, ARP, A-R-P.
Yep.
ARC, right. ARC.
So I think when you talk about this in public, you have to say that, because they're going to assume when you say ARP, they're going to think it's ARP when you're 55 or older.
Yeah, American.
Some of us know about that.
Hey, I get my card soon.
Oh, well, someone may know what that is then.
Also, David Richard, thank you so much for putting this together. I love the new budget format that you're using and everything else like that. And it's very easy to follow. And clearly you've hit the goalpost. Thank you so much.
A pleasure.
So now we have to open to the public.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody?
There is no one here.
Motion to close?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Or it's closed. Adjourn?
Mayor,
Motion.
Second.
Mayor, if I can, just before you take that vote. So with the changes that you've authorized here, we will prepare the state budget document, which is what you actually vote on to introduce and then vote to adopt. Some of you are familiar with that format. Some of you are not, perhaps, because it's not usually what we go through in our budget deliberations. But you will be getting that electronically for the meeting. And if as you go through it, you have any questions, please feel free to contact David and I, and we'll try to help make those connections between all of these spreadsheets that you've seen and how all of that gets displayed on the state budget document, because it is a little different. Okay.
All right, do we get the motion to adjourn?
Yes, moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Just, I know this is, I sent a text to Richard.
Oh.
And hopefully you'll send it out. You get my text, Richard?
I'm just seeing it.
Okay. And Richard will forward it to everybody. 'Cause I don't think we're allowed to discuss it. It's the budget meeting.
I'll take a look at it and send it along.
Okay, thank you. All right, next meeting is our general meeting, which is on Wednesday, March 24th. Thank you.
Good day, everybody.